So on to the important part. My house. My house is old. Around 90 to 100 years old. It's the oldest remaining building in my rural area, besides the general store, which isn't operational. I couldn't give you a complete background for this house and its owner's history, as I don't know it. What I can tell you is that this was my grandparents' home before it was passed to me, and both of my grandparents died here. Mama passed in the guest bedroom, the bedroom at the time, and Papa passed in the living room. The hospice bed would only fit in this room. I know that makes for strange circumstances, but they were both natural deaths. I quote because they were both rather nasty natural deaths, one from cancer and the other from pneumonia. So no malice or foul play, as far as they are concerned, but not peaceful either. I'm honestly starting to think this house is haunted, or at least has something supernatural happening. I do not have the means to capture video or quality pictures, but I can at least tell you what I've seen and experienced. And maybe you can give me some advice. First, I started noticing this mist outside one of the living room windows. It's always the same window, but it isn't consistent. Like I couldn't plan a recording because it isn't always at a certain time or day. I've seen it 3 or 4 times now. At first, I tried to explain this away as the neighbour's washing machine. Ours does this. But their washer's on the wrong side of the house. There's no way the mist could carry that far, and there's a 6-foot fence between their house and the area where the mist appears. It can't be our wash, because again, wrong side of the house and too far away. So I thought, maybe it could be smoke from the neighbour's wood stove drifting since the smoke funnel is close enough. But when I checked, there was no smoke coming out. The way the mist moves is odd too. It's low to the ground, only about 4 foot high in total, so it's very easy to miss. But it doesn't move like a wash mist or smoke. It almost looks like a cloud being pulled on a string. It moves as one mass, very quickly. Second, I have 2 doors that go into my bathroom. One in the walk-in closet of my bedroom, and one that leads in from the washroom, mudroom entryway, right next to the front door on the adjacent wall. I can open one of the doors, and the other will open. Doesn't matter which, the opposite one will open. I could easily explain this away with loose latches, wallowed out latch holes, but the thing is, I can close the doors. Not locked, just pulled closed. And I cannot push them open once closed. There's no handle turning, no rustle noises, just opening silently. If I lock them, they don't open. But I can sometimes hear a thump on each of the doors. Almost like someone trying to open a door, realizing it's locked, then trying the other. Third, I can hear footsteps, and so can my husband. I can hear them in the bedroom and the attic. Usually, and most commonly, I will hear them in the attic. I can be sitting in the living room and hear what sounds like footsteps just above me, right about where my chandelier sits. It feels like I'm being watched, and it's super creepy. One day my husband and I both heard what sounded like 3 or 4 heavy footsteps, like how a workbook sounds, just above us. It was crystal clear and scary enough that we thought someone broke in. Without going into detail of my house layout, just know that this isn't an impossibility, and has happened in the past, because the ladder to the attic is in a screened-in porch adjoined to the house, and the door into the screened-in porch doesn't look, and neither does the pull-down door to the attic ladder. However, the door between the house and the porch does. He went up there with a gun and flashlight in hand, and there was nothing, not even a stray squirrel or bird. Sometimes I can hear them follow me around up there. If I leave the living room and go to the bedroom to grab something or change, etc., I can hear the thumps above me in the room I walked into. Only a couple of times have I heard them in the room with me. Footsteps a few feet from me, and only in the bedroom, the room that my grandpa slept in. My grandparents slept in separate rooms. The one that was his is now where my husband and I sleep. I've never heard them on the ground floor anywhere else. Fourth and last, there are unexplainable noises. These vary vastly and are not consistent. Twice we heard what sounded like 3 knocks, like how you would knock on a door. On the window of our room, or possibly the window of our walk-in closet. The windows are not far apart, and in the dark when trying to sleep, it can be difficult to accurately place sound locations, lol. Again, crystal clear and scary enough that my husband turned on his table lamp, threw on some shorts, grabbed the gun and a flashlight. All of this in, say, a minute max due to how everything is set up and where everything is. But probably less than that since he was pissed thinking someone was outside. He went out ready to confront someone, but there was no one anywhere to be seen, and there really are no places to hide. We have a chain link fence, and while it would be possible to climb over it and scuttle out of sight, it would be quite noisy and difficult in the dark. A flashlight could be seen easily, so I'd rule that out. We usually leave our gate open so someone could easily just walk out of the yard, but you would have been seeing them going down the road at least, and there was nothing. This one especially scares me. I can't completely rule out this is some horrible prank, but I don't find that to be the most plausible answer either. We sometimes hear what sounds like items falling in other rooms. A couple times, I've heard what sounds like some of my dishes falling to the floor in the kitchen, only to go in there and find that nothing's been moved or broken. Sometimes it'll sound like some of my items in the spare bedroom or game room, what used to be my grandmother's bedroom, have slid off their shelves. Or it'll sound like the TV in there has come on. It makes a startup noise, similar to an old Windows boot-up noise, only to find that it's still off. Lots of little things like that happen almost daily. The last weird noise was one that hasn't happened in a while. My husband uses an old 1994 Toyota long bed truck that used to be my grandfather's. My dad gifted it to him because I love that truck and have a ton of memories with my papa in it. The passenger side door handle is broken on the outside, so he has to open the door from the inside for me to get in. Well, if you grab the handle on the outside, it makes a very distinct rattle noise. One night, as we were starting to drift off to sleep, we heard that distinct sound. We thought someone was trying to break into the truck. They wouldn't have found much, but that's not the point. My husband didn't own a gun at that point, so he grabbed a knife from the dresser top. It's still dark in the house at this point. He isn't turning on the light in the hopes that whoever it is won't run off. He quietly creeps through the closet, opens the door to the bathroom, opens the last door between the bathroom and entry, and peeks outside. He can't see anything, so he turns on the outside light. There's nothing there. No one around. Someone could easily have opened the other door, and probably would have tried at least, and could have gotten into the truck. There were no footprints, no sign of entry into the truck, nothing missing. The handle was in the correct spot. By this, I mean, remember it's broken? If you lift up on it, sometimes it can stuck in an open position. It was just really strange. We know what we heard. It's a very distinct sound, and I've never heard anything that comes close to it. For some background, I live in an old 2-story house in the middle of a small town with my mom and her parents. And I've always joked with my mom that it's haunted because of how eerie it looks at night. Multiple rooms in the basement, most of which we haven't been in yet, etc. Note, I'm still a little freaked out by what happened. I'm sorry if I repeat certain words or phrases too much. So, anyways, I was just about to take my meds for the night, so I walked into the bathroom to fill up a bottle of water. My bedroom is one of 3 upstairs. Mine is parallel to the other 2, and the bathroom is at the end of the hallway. The only light was the one coming from the bathroom, which we always keep on. The rest of the hall was pitch dark. So I walk in, fill up my water, and decide to wash my hands. All of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see someone walk into the room. I flinch, because I didn't hear them come in, but I figured it was my mom or grandmother. Considering they don't have a great sense of privacy, I assumed they came in for whatever weird reason. But as I took another look in the doorway, a weird shaped figure about half the size of me, covered in what looked like a bedsheet, I know, cliche, right? Holding something in its hand, almost like a post-it note or a letter. I only saw it for about half a second, and then it faded away like smoke. I froze in place for a second, my hands still drenched in soap and water, and then bolted for my mom's room, not taking any consideration for how loud or disruptive I might seem. I was scared shitless, to say the least. I still kind of am. I just can't shake the fact that whatever I just saw, or whatever I just think I saw, gave me a physical reaction. In the midst of writing all this, I wanted to delete it all, in worry that I was overreacting. But you all might not believe some timid 14-year-old, understandably so. So I guess this post has no purpose besides something to ease my mind. I love writing, and letting things out like this is my biggest coping mechanism. I bought my first house in 2003, and I was over the moon. Shortly after moving in, two of my neighbours began joking with me about the ghosts in my house. Well, I thought they were joking, so I just played along, pretending I'd seen one, and it was no big deal. As time went on that summer, I met more and more of my neighbours, and they all brought up the same topic. Finally, an elderly woman on the block who was quite kind and friendly told me a story after I'd asked her. I knew she wasn't going to screw with my head, which is why I asked her in the first place. Turns out, the previous owner purchased the home and never lived there because she said it was haunted. Sounds in the night of footsteps and sobbing, and glimpses of a man sitting in the kitchen covered in blood. One of my neighbours helped with the renovations of the house, and said that he was putting up drywall when he felt something lift up his dreadlocks. Though I've had paranormal experiences before, it had been years, and by then I just chalked it up to night terrors. One day I went to a small neighbourhood video store to rent a movie. I had to fill out a form with my demographic data and my credit card info. The owner of the store looked at the form and said, "Oh my god, you live in that house?" I asked her what she meant, and she explained that her former employee had committed suicide in my house. She came to the house as soon as she'd heard, but the house had been taped off by police as a potential crime scene. She told me that he had just moved into the house with his partner and called his mom because he wanted to invite her over to meet his partner and come out to her. This was in the early 90s when being gay was a big deal. His mother already knew he was gay because he bought a house with a man and disowned him right over the phone. That same week, he received a letter from a HIV testing centre stating that he'd tested positive. This is when HIV was a death sentence. He then sat at the kitchen table, ate a bowl of cereal, and shot himself in the head with a revolver. Since then, she's had multiple paranormal experiences in the store, with videos flying off shelves and even levitating off of them. The most I've experienced is sounds at night. Sounds of Cheerios being poured into a bowl. I don't eat cereal. And sounds of sobbing in the kitchen. I often awaken to both. I remember my grandmother saying, "When the dead come to you, they want something. Perform an act of charity in their name and pray for them." So I did. I sat down at the kitchen table one night and lit a candle, and told him that each night I would recite a novena prayer for him before I lit candle. On the 9th night of the first novena, to St. Anthony, patron saint of lost souls, I heard uncontrollable sobbing. I felt a strong presence of grief and despair, and the sound of hyperventilating breathing, as though someone couldn't catch the breath. I sat in the presence of this knowing it was not malignant, but rather a connection of intimacy and compassion of which he was in need. For 45 days, I said a novena prayer before I lit candle for his soul, and had a mass said in his name. A few times I had awakened to feel his presence standing over my bed, but knew it was not a malignant presence. This still happens from time to time, but less and less frequently. From the 4th to the end of 5th grade, roughly, I lived in an apartment building. It wasn't all that nice, and it was very crowded, but we didn't live there for that long. Now, that the backstory is out of the way, my friend who lived 2 floors down, we'll call her Effie, would come over a lot and we would go exploring around the halls. It was a super quiet building, despite all the people packed in, so Effie and I would take off our shoes and walk around the halls, knocking on doors and running or stupid kid things like that. One day we came across a hall we'd never seen before. that led to an emergency staircase. There was a heavy metal door with a small glass window. Right in the corner there was a small circular dent that spiderwebbed outward, as if someone had tried to shoot through it. Creepy as hell already. So Effie and I heaved the door open with our tiny 9 and 11-year-old noodle arms and examined it. Just as we get into this pitch black staircase, we hear this blood-curdling, inhuman shriek, and we hightailed it out of there. The door slammed shut and we ran back to my place. The next day we brought a tape recorder and some flashlights. We opened the door as quietly as we could and waited. There wasn't a sound. We looked at the window from the inside, and it really did look like a bullet hole. Just before I was about to say something fell from the very top of the staircase and shattered at the bottom. That sound was followed by another shriek and loud pounding footsteps. We ran again and didn't go back. A few days later, Effie and I were walking around our building, and I asked her about the tape recorder. She said she thought her mum threw it away because she couldn't find it. Literally at that exact moment, we heard a clatter, and just a few feet ahead, the smashed tape recorder was on the ground, dropped from the balcony of the highest apartments. We both looked up, and there was a very brief, we would have missed it if we'd waited a moment longer, flash of a face in the sliding glass door. My mother once told me that flies were Satan's messengers, but I didn't quite understand what she meant. Until I was faced with an event that showed me how true that statement was. When my son was very young, his father Mike and I worked for a real estate company as head maintenance and painting in the desert of Palmdale, California. We were having problems with some tenants at our apartment stealing tools and equipment from our garage. So the owner of the company we worked for told us that there was a small house at the edge of town that needed some work and cleaning up. He said the prior tenants up and left after 2 years without saying a word, leaving everything behind inside the house, the garage and in the back of the property. All we had to do was throw away some trash, some minor repairs and some painting. By the time we were done, he said that there was a unit becoming available behind Mike's parents, and we could have it. We were excited to get out of the hellhole we were in, and even though we would be working during our stay there, it was a great place for our dogs to run. It happened pretty quick. No sooner did our things go into storage, our boss was calling us to go out there. The house was old and sat back from the road. There was one lonely street light shining in front, and had a large construction dumpster placed on the side of the property. It took us a while to make the place habitable at best. I told Mike, wow, the former tenants really did leave everything behind, from food on the stove to clothes in the closets. They must have been in some hurry, but at least they left some nice furniture. The first couple of weeks were different. You know, all the creaks of an old house kind of different. But the longer we stayed, the clearer it was why the tenants left as abruptly as they did. My son Cody's room was right across from ours, and sometimes in the middle of the night, he would start groaning. I would go in, only to find his legs over the foot of his bed, him still asleep, and the blanket on the floor. I just figured he wiggled down, so I would tuck him back in bed. One morning, he was sitting in the kitchen eating a bowl of cereal, while I was fixing the drawer, and he started telling me about this little boy in his room. I thought he was talking about a dream. He looked dead in my face and insisted it was real. You see, my son had a very active imagination, and he talked to everything, even his shoes, so this was not unusual to me, so I didn't think about it too much. There were a few things going on that I couldn't explain. Strange things, but not scary at that time. I woke up with small red circles the size of a nickel on the upper part of my arms that later turned into bruises, and Mike had scratches down his back that he didn't even know were there. I think because we were so focused on getting this house and property done, we weren't really paying attention to anything that might be paranormal. Plus, Mike did not believe in that sort of thing at all. Later that week, I was up early painting the French doors, separating the living room from the hall to the bedrooms, when my son came out of his room, crying. I rushed over and picked him up, and brought him over to the couch to calm him down and find out what was wrong. I thought maybe he just had a bad dream, but this cry was different. Between skips of each breath, he told me the boy in his room got big and turned into a monster. He was grabbing his foot, so I looked down, and what I saw was humanly impossible. The end of his sock was twisted so hard that it was stiff and hard to pull off his foot. His big toe was purple, and there was a small cut where the other toenail dug into it. I was really surprised it wasn't broken. Oh my gosh, it was scary. There was no way, no matter what Mike said, was I going to let him sleep in that room anymore. All doubt was gone. There was something in that house, and I had to stay on my guard. I called my mother and told her what happened, because she knew a lot more about this stuff than I did. And she told me to go out and get some sage and salt and cleanse the house as soon as possible. So I did. Later that day, despite Mike making fun of me, I cleansed every room and we got ready for bed. Mike on one side, me on the other, and Cody in the middle. 20 minutes after falling asleep, it felt like a slap on my cheek with a voice that screamed, "Wake up!" in my ear. I sat straight up, then hit Mike and told him to get up. He grumbled a minute and opened his eyes wide. The whole house was vibrating. At first we thought it was an earthquake, but it didn't stop. It was a pulsing vibration. Even the chain of the ceiling fan was moving. The logical thought was maybe it was pipes under the house. But the pipes were located at the other end of the house, and the house was on a cement slab. And the water heater was outside. Just then, Mike jumped up, grabbing the bat next to the bed, and ran out of the room, scaring the crap out of me. He said that he saw the reflection of a deformed face in the glass of the French doors in the living room, so he thought it was an intruder. He came back, confused, and sat on the end of the bed. That night we laid there, feeling the house shake and moan until we fell asleep. The next morning Mike was talking with a friend on the phone, and the first thing out of his friend's mouth was, maybe the house was haunted. He gave me a look, like perhaps there might be something to this paranormal thing. A week passed, and needless to say that we were on the edge, but the house was almost done. Only the garage and property were left to do. It was Sunday, and my mother, who had my other 5 kids for the summer, thought she would make the trip over the hill to see us on their way back from church. She said that the closer they got, the more she had the feeling of dread take over her. When they arrived, the kids flooded from the van, gave kisses and hugs, then ran out back to play with the dogs. My mother and eldest sister came in and sat down in the living room. Everything was fine, but this look came over my mother's face. She said, "Do you smell something? It smells like something dead." I didn't at the time, but the smell eventually took over the whole house, and flies started showing up in droves. We didn't know where they were coming from. Mike looked all around for a dead rodent or something, but there was no reason for it. We closed all the vents and windows, but they kept coming and completely covering the ceiling, and halfway down the walls like a thick fog. Mom said that whatever was in that house didn't want them there. You see, my mother was very spiritual, and people often referred to her as a beacon of light, and I felt like maybe she was right about it, not wanting her there. But before she could get up, cut the visit short, her eyes got heavy, and she felt drained. She said that she didn't understand what was wrong with herself, and my sister couldn't drive, so my mother went to lay down in the van for a bit. In the meantime, the kids came in, and after the initial shock of seeing the living room and kitchen taken over by flies, we made a game of it. We took the shop vac and a vacuum and sucked the flies right out of the air and off the ceiling. I remember filling up 2 bags and half a canister with flies. It started to get late, and I knew that my mother wanted to get on the road before dark, so I sent my sister out to the van to go get her. Mom walked up the driveway slowly, stopping a few times along the way. When she came in, she just said that she couldn't make that long drive, feeling the way she did. So I made some food and told her and my sister to sleep in my room, and the rest of us hunkered down with sleeping bags in the living room, occasionally getting up in the night to kill flies. Nobody wanted to sleep in my son's room, that's for sure. The next morning, after a restless night for all of us, I asked my mother to take my youngest son with them, not only for his safety, but so that we could finish this job and get out of there. I thought he'd be upset leaving me, but he was happy to get out of there. I didn't blame him one bit. The most surprising thing was that 30 minutes after they pulled out of the driveway, every fly in the house went away, leaving not one behind. My mom called after that they got home, and she said that it didn't surprise her. The work around the house was coming to an end, thanks to a few friends reluctantly coming over to help, so all that was left was the outside and the garage. On this day, my friend Bonnie and her boyfriend came over to help. She heard so many stories that curiosity got the best of her, having studied the occult. We were working in the garage and the guys were working outside. The garage was packed with dust, covered boxes, and random junk was all over the place, and there was a thick layer of desert sand and dirt on the floor. It felt dark and ominous in there. Despite it being the middle of summer, it was noticeably cool as well, which we didn't mind at all. After we got all of the boxes out, we started pulling things off the shelves. There must have been around 12 glass jars, various sizes, with brown liquid in them, and something floating inside them that we couldn't figure out what it was. The lids were sealed with red and black wax, and what looked like hair was wrapped around the lid. I told her to just put them down and finish cleaning so we could get out of here. So she climbed on the workbench and started emptying the cabinets while I swept the floor. It looked like there was paint on the ground underneath all that dirt. Just then, she said, "Ew." I stopped sweeping and went over to where she was to see what she was referring to. She asked me to give her a flashlight and she started pulling out some pretty weird things. A crow's beak, a chicken claw, a bottle cap with what looked like brownish red dried ink, and a long feather writing quill, and some human teeth. Ew. I told her to toss that stuff and went on sweeping. As I was looking down, and it looked like the floor was moving, so I asked her to toss me the flashlight. When I lit up the floor, it was maggots all over where I was standing, so I screamed and jumped on a stool. Well, my scream startled her, so she jerked and knocked over one of the jars and it went crashing down where I was sweeping, and the liquid washed away some of the dirt, revealing a pentagram painted on the floor, and what looked like some sort of animal embryo came out of the broken jar. The hair on my arm raised, and we both ran the hell out so fast, and we refused to go back in there. We worked in the yard and left the garage and everything in it up to the guys. We never slept in the house after that day. We stayed at Bonnie's mother's house and moved into our new place a few weeks later. Thank you for reading. Just a little side note, as my son, who is 25 now, was reading this, he said that he remembers those times, despite being so young. Years later, the kids all remembered sucking flies from the air, but they never remembered why. I grew up in a small town. My house was one of the oldest ones in the town. We lived right beside 3 sets of train tracks. Growing up, I always heard voices. My friend heard them too in my house. They weren't regular voices, it's hard to explain. But if she didn't hear them with me, I would have passed it off as my imagination. It was only words here and there, but they came across like a dream. We heard them, but we knew they weren't there, like a fast car zooming by. It was always a man, and we never knew what exactly he was saying. It was a regular occurrence when I was growing up that stuff would fly off the back of the toilet and hit the opposite wall in our bathroom. My mum finally told them to shut up, and it stopped. When I was about 12, my parents and my brother went to my brother's hockey game at the local arena. I stayed at home and had a bath. Our bathroom was on the left of a hallway, with the washer and dryer on the right, and a door leading to an old office room that had stairs going to the basement. As I was having my bath,
I heard heavy boot steps come up the stairs towards the back door. All of a sudden they stopped. And then they were outside of the bathroom door. And it sounded like something either kicked or punched the washing machine. It was loud. I was so scared I got dressed and ran away to a friend's house without leaving a note. I got used to the big guy and found out through his silhouette there was a woman in the house as well. She's not nice and hangs around the stairs. Even now, at 31 years of age, if I go up the stairs at my parents' house, I always have this horrible feeling that someone is behind me and wants to pull me down. I've never had that feeling anywhere else. My nephew is autistic and would talk to the ghosts. When my nephew was 4, he told my mom that the man's name is Sonny and that Sonny watches us. He told her that if we wanted to see Sonny, we would have to go down to the basement and dig. Sonny died falling on the train tracks. He doesn't like the woman and won't go up the stairs alone, so I don't know much about her, other than she is not nice. So this one isn't actually a story of one of my ghosts, but another one in another house. One of my oldest friends grew up in a house that apparently used to be a funeral home. She lived just a few houses down from mine, and it was very haunted. There was even a brick on the house that said, "Dead House." It was there for as long as we can remember, so we don't know when it was written or who wrote it. Anywho, I spent the night one night. We were maybe 13 or 14 years old. She had 2 younger brothers. One was maybe 4 or 5 at the time, and the other was 2. We'd just woken up and we were just laying in bed, kind of talking, being lazy. We could hear her 2 younger brothers downstairs, being typical noisy kids. We heard a female voice say, "Shh, you need to be quiet." And the boys went quiet. We figured her mom was downstairs with them, so we didn't think anything of it. A few minutes later, her mom walks in and asks us if we told the boys to be quiet. We told her no. We thought it was her. It wasn't her. We all just kind of went quiet, and her mom left the room and went downstairs. While this story is short and there isn't much to it, when we all realised that there was a woman downstairs talking to the boys, that everyone in the house heard speak and actually made the boys quiet down, it's always stuck with me. Like I said in my last post, we heard voices in my house, but they were always very quick and we could never understand exactly what was said. This voice was clear as day and loud enough to be heard in 2 rooms on another floor, like there was a living person there with them. In the end, it was nothing more than chilling. So this happened to me when I was about 5 years old, so kindergarten. I used to live in an old town that had a population of about 265 residents, all French-speaking community, and my family wasn't. We moved into this house and it was a very dark house with not many windows and a cheesy pink cross on the garage. Many things happened in this house. This is just one story. I was a little kid just hanging out in the basement shortly after we'd moved in, and I was sitting on the only big chair I had of my own in the basement. As a kid, I was totally stoked to have the entire basement to myself. It was completely finished. As I was sitting on this chair, I had a bottle I was blowing over the top to teach you how to whistle, so I was practicing. I suddenly had a shadow fall over me, and I started to talk to whomever was standing behind me, thinking it was my dad. "Hey Dad, look, I can do it. I can whistle, toot toot." Whoever it was suddenly grabbed my shoulder at first. It was just a hand. Soon it was a lot of pressure to the point I winced and screamed out, "Hey, that really hurts." I turned around at this point. There's nobody there. I'm quite freaked out at this point, so I call out to see if my mum is in the laundry room. No answer. I bolt upstairs and my mum was in the kitchen. I ask her if somehow she came downstairs and grabbed my shoulder and magically made it upstairs in a flash. She said no. I told her what happened and she kind of didn't believe me at first. Then I moved my shirt. And clear as day, there were fingerprints on my shoulder and a bruise was left behind. This is just one of many incidents that happened in this house. wanted to share a story from my childhood with y'all. I've changed all the names for privacy reasons. I'm the youngest in my family, and I've just turned 17. All my siblings are married, and really older than me. So all my childhood, I've spent alone in my Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jared's house. Uncle Jared is my dad's older brother. My parents both work, and weren't home most of the time. I've always gotten a really heavy feeling when I was in their house and experienced really questionable things. One of the things I vividly remember is seeing a silhouette of a tall man in a coat and hat. He was standing at the end of their hall, just facing in my direction. It was kind of like a shadow, but he didn't move at all. Whenever I slept over there, I have my own room at their house, I would hear furniture moving upstairs, and all the bedrooms are downstairs on the first floor. The kitchen is on the ground floor. The second floor only has a big lounge type area for parties, and it's always locked, so I know for a fact that no one goes there in the middle of the night or any other time. Once my Aunt Sarah and Uncle Jared had gone to visit their son who lives in another country. At that time, my older sister Amy, who was 31, and Jess, who's 28, were having their finals for college and high school. Amy is 14 years older than me, and Jess is 10 years older than me. So when they had their finals, I would be playing around or disturbing them. So to study, they had stayed at my aunt's house for the time being. After staying over there for a few days, suddenly they came back. When I questioned them, they told me the other day Amy was in the kitchen baking. She has a weird habit of baking when she's stressed. When she felt someone walk behind her for a while, she thought it was Jess, but when she felt someone put their chin on her shoulder, she turned to look and saw no one in the kitchen. She had freaked out, and when she questioned Jess told her that she hadn't left the room, which freaked them both, and the next day they rushed back. We don't tell our parents about all this stuff because they don't believe in all this. Another thing I remember is that whenever I was going back to my house, I always had this feeling that I was getting chased, and I would run really fast all the way to my home. My aunt's home was never locked since we live in a gated community and we are really familiar with the neighbours. One time, I remember I went over to her house and it was empty. At that time, Aunt Sarah frequently visited her dad in the hospital. And clearly remember I was standing in the entrance of her room and something ran really fast behind me. At first I thought I'd imagined it, but when I turned to leave, I saw the carpet in the end of the hall was a bit turned over from the corner, like someone stumbled on it. I had ran from there so fast that time. I have noticed that whenever Aunt Sarah wasn't home, I couldn't stay at her house. Something always happened. 2 years ago, Aunt Sarah passed away. The hospital couldn't diagnose what illness she had. One thing you should know about me is I'm extremely good at pretending I'm asleep. So when my mom talked to her sister, I would listen. Not really proud of it, but I'm really curious about almost everything. One time I heard her talk of how Aunt Sarah had told my mom how she, Aunt Sarah, had found something really disturbing hidden above an vent in one of the rooms. She said it looked like an animal's gut or something, and Aunt Sarah once had mentioned to me that her brother had found a weird picture that looked like it was drawn of their family living in horrible conditions. One time I heard my mom say that before Aunt Sarah died, she had told my mom that someone had done this, her illness, to her. I was horrified. After she passed away, I just couldn't go in her house. I literally feel like someone is suffocating me, and that heavy feeling in my chest from before is always still there. Whatever is in her house is extremely powerful now that she's gone. It terrifies me, but occasionally I have to go over there and I just have this weird feeling that makes me look over my shoulders every other minute. Please tell me what I should do, and what type of entity is so powerful to do stuff like that. P.S. My Uncle Jared had moved to another country where his son lives after Aunt Sarah's death, so the house is always empty, but occasionally we go over to hers to make sure everything is in its place and nothing needs fixing. Update. I talked with my parents and they were really dismissive of the situation and said that I was being paranoid. So I showed them this thread in the comments where a few people said they had similar incidents. After reading it, they told me to leave it alone and stop thinking about it. I was getting frustrated, so I took it upon myself and called my uncle.
We had a lengthy talk, and he told me what I knew was only the tip of the iceberg, and there's been a lot going on in that house since they moved in. Here are a few of the things he mentioned in our talk. Apparently I wasn't the only one who saw the shadow figure of a man. My aunt saw it too, but in another part of the house, my cousin's bedroom, which was always locked, even when my aunt and uncle lived there. When my sister stayed at my uncle's house, he said he actually told them to leave before sundown and not sleep there. He said that there's been a lot of activity, but he won't tell me because he doesn't want to scare me. Myself and my two flatmates, D and H, all 19 female, just moved into a 3-bedroom home on a suburban street in one of the major cities in our country. Since moving in, we've had experiences with weird, unexplainable shit in and around the property, both while together and alone in the house. None of us have ever believed in the paranormal or the supernatural, and while there are definitely logical explanations for all this, we're just at a loss of what they could be. A little quick background. We viewed the property for the first time on January 9th of this year. It was the first place we went to a viewing for. We continued looking at other properties, but the leasing agent contacts us on January 14th to offer us the house. Obviously, we find it very strange that they offered us the house so quickly, but since it's usually pretty difficult for a group of students to convince a landlord to rent to them, and it was the best property we'd viewed, we accepted. They wanted us to move in very quickly, which was also a little bit of a red flag, but we had other people inspect the property for us and didn't find anything super wrong with it, so we went forward with the process. We signed the lease and moved in on February 4th, less than a month after we originally viewed the property. More information for context purposes. Place was built in 2005, sold on November 2020 to our current landlords, who bought it as an investment property after being on the market for a month. The current landlords have never lived in the property, and we have never met or had contact with them. We deal with everything through a property manager. Nobody has lived in the house since at least November 2020, and the listing that we found for it was posted in early December 2020. Generally, a house like this wouldn't stay on the rental market for more than a week or so in our city, because good housing is pretty scarce. We know absolutely nothing about the previous tenants or why they moved out, and neither did any of the agents we spoke to. We also have no clue why the house was on the market for so long. The rent isn't ridiculous, all of the rooms are decently sized and have great views. It's in the zone for multiple good schools, and within walking distance to a major public transport station. There were no super obvious things wrong with the house, and when we looked through it for the first time, apart from just needing a good clean. When we asked the letting agent, she said something vague about how the property was just given to their company from a different real estate company. Our house is at the end of a shared driveway with 2 other houses. You have to go up a set of external stairs to get to the front door. Downstairs we have an open plan lounge and kitchen and a small bathroom. Upstairs are our 3 bedrooms and another shared larger bathroom. The house backs onto a small hill and then a busy main road. There's a fence with 2 gates that separates us from the main road, which is kind of redundant because there's also a huge gap in our fence line that backs onto a different shared driveway that can very easily accessed from the street. Onto the weird shit. When we first moved in, at some point within the first week, we each felt a specific presence within the house while thinking we were home alone, and each felt the presence so strongly that we had to search the house to confirm that we were actually home alone. While doing our initial cleaning, we found what seems like urine in both mine and H's wardrobes. There was also back scratch marks in my wardrobe that the property manager couldn't explain. Like, looks like an animal or small child had gone at the wall with something. Won't come off the wall either. We've woken up in the middle of the night to hear loud banging on the side of the house that's facing the fence in the street. None of us investigated the source at the time because, as curious as we were, we're also super passionate about not being murdered. There were also no trees close enough to the house that could have made contact with the walls to explain the banging. While cleaning again a few weeks later, I found what looks like dried blood on the windowsill in the lounge. I have no idea if we missed it during our initial clean or if it was new. 100% did not belong to any of us. Dee kept waking up with bruises all over her legs that she couldn't explain. Legitimately looked like she'd been on the wrong end of a paintball gun. H found a random chicken bone in her balcony. We are primarily vegetarian household, and the only access to the balcony is through her room. We can track our power usage through an app, and there have been times where we'll have a large spike in power usage at times when none of us have been home. One time in the middle of the night, I woke up to what I thought was someone having a loud conversation in the next room. It turned out to be my laptop, which had somehow turned itself on and had started playing an episode of Friends, which would have been fine if the laptop lid hadn't been shut and locked with both a passcode and facial recognition. It has never happened before, and has happened once since, also in the middle of the night. H woke up one night in a state of sleep paralysis. She says she saw a man sitting on her floor next to her bed, watching her and eating cereal. She has never experienced sleep paralysis before, and has not experienced it since. Has no clue who the dude was. We have a sensor light on our deck at the top of the stairs. You have to stand in a very specific place on the deck for it to activate. Just to emphasize, the light will not turn on unless you stand in that very specific place. And even then, you have to make some kind of movement for it to see you. While home alone in the lounge, Dee kept hearing noises on the stairs and would open the curtain expecting it to be me coming home from work. The sensor light would be on, but there would be nobody there. This happened multiple times throughout the night. This type of sensor won't get tripped by wind or light, and there are no trees or plants nearby that could have tripped it either. It's not just us experiencing weird shit. One night while Dee's boyfriend was over, Dee and I left the house, leaving him at home alone. H was at work. He texts us shortly after we leave the house to tell us that Dee's bedroom door shuts on its own, and then he heard distinct footsteps down the middle of the stairs. Dee's boyfriend, as a note, is the most cynical motherfucker on the planet. Definitely wouldn't make something like this up. Usually, while the windows are open, the doors will shut on their own due to convection currents, but since it's currently cold as balls, we had shut all of the windows in the house prior to leaving. One of our friends stayed with us during one of the lockdowns, and she also felt a presence upstairs and heard noises while being home alone. Since moving in, H and I have experienced problems with sleep. We've never had problems getting to sleeping prior to moving in. I regularly wake up at 3 or 4 in the morning for no discernible reason. We are by no means light sleepers. Originally, we chalked it up to getting used to a new place, but it's been 4 months now, and it's still happening. In addition to all this, there have been more instances that we can count where we'll hear weird noises from somewhere in the house that are outside of the standard house-making noises as it cools down, and creaking pipes that we just collectively decided to politely ignore. Again, in the interest of not getting murdered. And finally, we have felt distinct, simultaneous declines in our mental health since we moved in. We were each super keen to move out and be independent, but we've all had a significant drop in our mood and well-being, to the point where Dee has had to up her antidepressant dose. There are other factors that could possibly have affected it, but each of us has experienced a kind of low energy that we haven't felt before we moved out, and we couldn't explain it. Our hypothesis. Obviously, all of these events have some kind of explanation, unrelated or not. All of these things could very well be unrelated and coincidental. We're just considering things that would explain all of the strange shit that's been going on. Kind of half as a joke, kind of not. Our first hypothesis is that we have a poltergeist of some kind. Would explain the weird noises, the bruises, the low moods, the waking up in the middle of the night, sounding like someone is in the house when there isn't, and the person sitting on H's floor. We've talked about drawing protection runes on all of the entrance points to the house and saging the place, but beyond that, we don't really know what else to do apart from just accept life with our quirky new roommate and hope that they don't go all Annabelle on us. If the place was haunted, it would definitely explain why the agent was so keen to get rid of the property so quickly to a group of naive teenage girls, because we've had no other serious problems with the house. Our second and probably 10 times scarier option is that we actually have someone living on or around our property. There are 2 possible places where this person could be staying. We do have an attic, but the only internal access point is in the wardrobe in my room, and I definitely would have heard somebody climbing in and out of that access point during the night, or noticed stuff being moved around. There might be an external access point on the roof, but we haven't been able to get up there to check. We've heard stuff coming from the roof before, but nothing that we could really definitely say was somebody climbing in there from the outside, or someone moving around up there. The other one is a space underneath the house that we've affectionately dubbed the murder hut, because to be honest, it looks like a serial killer's den. When we first moved in, there was a collection of old furniture there left by, we're assuming by the last tenants. A rug, a chair, a set of drawers, but nothing concrete to suggest there was someone currently living in there. No sleeping area, no food scraps or garbage anywhere. We also thought of the possibility of somebody not physically living and sleeping on the property, but maybe someone just regularly walking onto the property through that big gap in the fence and causing problems. We're really at a loss of what's causing these things. We're getting a security camera for the front door and now deadbolts on the gates outside, in addition to trying out cleansing and purification rituals, just to cover all of our bases. We're also thinking of requesting information about the previous tenants from our property manager and asking about getting the hole in the fence fixed. Can't afford to fix it by ourselves. And we're just being dumb and paranoid? Or is this actually something strange going on in our house? About 5 years ago, I had just moved into a new house with my wife at the time, and two kids aged 2.5 and 1. My 2.5-year-old was very articulate for his age, and so one day we were walking out the front door. He points across the house and asks, "Mommy, who's that little girl over there?" Well, my wife and I just kind of froze, because he was kind of kid that never made up any imaginary friends or anything like that. But the moment passed, and we kind of forgot about it. About 6 or 8 months later, I remember I was in my bedroom late at night. I have a large window in my bedroom that looks out into my backyard. I also had a couple strings of lights overhead that illuminated the yard perfectly. One night, I was up studying for a class the next day. When I looked outside, I saw that my kid's swing set had one swing going back and forth in a perfect pendulum motion, like someone was on it, while the swing next to it was dead still. This was not the first time this happened. It was the third, I think. But it was the instant that I remember the most clearly and took the most notice. I honestly have no idea why I didn't think to tell my wife or to take a video, but I just stood there in the window and watched it for about 2 minutes, and it kept up perfectly consistently. I grabbed my flashlight and walked out to my deck to get a better look. Still swinging. I'd been studying lots of science classes at that point, so my head was in the space of, I'm going to figure out the rational explanation of why this is happening. It was breezy out, so I walked up to the swing set and held my hand in different places around the swinging swing, and no breeze. Plus, the swing next to it was still dead. Also, my thought was that if it was the wind, there was no way it could keep a perfect back and forth motion. If a swing gets even a little of it, it would have collided with the one next to it. Anyway, I'm not sure if I had the previous encounter with my son in mind or not, but I had a very certain feeling at that moment that there was a little girl swinging on the swing. Almost like I could see her, but obviously couldn't. I also felt very at ease and not frightened at the least. Then after about 5 or 10 minutes, I stopped the swing just to see what would happen, and it remained stopped. I remember apologising out loud to the girl for stopping the swing, and told her that she could swing whenever she wanted to, but it never happened again after that, and I haven't had any additional encounters in this house. I looked up public records and asked the landlord if there was ever any little girl that had died in this house. Nothing. The only info that I could collect is that a few years before we moved in, there was an elderly woman who lived here for 20 years, but the owner had the landlord kick her out in fear that she would die in the property, so she had to move in with the family a few states away.
This happened when I was about 17. I moved out on my own for about 9 months. I had a friend who lived in the walkout basement suite of this old house on WYE. It wasn't horrible, but the backyard had a dilapidated pool and the backyard full of stuff. Nice trees, lot with a large driveway. I did use a Ouija board in this house, but nothing really happened. Just got really creeped out. On one occasion, when I was alone in the house, Both roommates were gone. My boyfriend also was not home, and the upstairs landlord was gone. Me quietly reading a book in the living room. I could hear someone walking around upstairs. I figured animals, no big deal. But then I heard something opening cupboards and open the fridge door. Odd. I didn't think anyone was home. So I checked out front for cars. Nobody. Now there were some stairs that led up to the landlord's half of the house, and I went up there and peeked under the door. It was locked. I saw the fridge door open and close and someone walk away from the fridge. I knocked and said hello to see if anyone was home. Suddenly, silence. Not a sound. Now, I had nowhere to go, and I was really weirded out by myself. I just waited until someone got home, and I still felt weird. So I went up and asked the landlord when he came home. I asked him if he invited anyone over while he was gone. He said no and asked me why. I told him what I heard and saw. He admitted to thinking the house was haunted because he's always finding cupboards open around the house. Was that you? This was a bit of a party house, so the kids that drank here would line up bottle caps along the backsplash. It was as if someone leaned forward and whispered into the ear and said my name. It was so clear. Ice ran down my spine. I shook my boyfriend awake. Was that you? Did you say my name? Barely conscious him. No, I was snoozing. I couldn't sleep all night, and I decided right then I was moving out. My friends and I have always been quite fond of going out urbex exploring. For those of you that don't know what that is, that's when you go out and look for abandoned and derelict buildings to explore and photograph. We didn't go out searching for the haunted side of things, we just enjoyed the eeriness and also the beauty of old, abandoned places. Living in Scotland, a lot of these abandoned places are normally surrounded by amazing scenery, from hills and mountains to thick forests and lush fields, so we always made a day out of it when we did go exploring. One house in particular was our favourite, so much so that we had already visited a couple of times prior to this experience. Myself and two of my best friends, we'll call them C and B, decided to go back, but the condition of the place had declined quite rapidly since the last time we'd been, and everything seemed very unstable, but we didn't let that stop us. Finding that our usual entry spots had been boarded up, we felt quite defeated, but decided to look for another entry anyway. After searching around for a while, we noticed that the roof on one of the lower parts of the house had been damaged by fire and was practically all gone. It wasn't the easiest to get up to, using a tree and each other to do so, but we finally got in. It was going relatively normal. We were wandering around the inside, searching and admiring the rooms we could still get into, being terrified by the occasional bird being spooked by our footsteps, and taking photos of the amazing architecture. However, something was different this time. The whole place felt off and a little more eerie than it normally did. I've always been what would you describe as spiritually inclined, so I felt this more than what my other friends did. One of them was a complete skeptic, so he just brushed it off and said we were over-exaggerating and making things up. His mind was going to be completely changed after leaving this house. After exploring the top 3 floors as much as we could, cringing at the spray paint art the vandals had left, we were on the ground floor just having a chat and discussing how much the house's condition had really declined. We were standing in one of the hallways, almost in a triangle formation. I was standing in a door frame with my back towards the empty room with C to my left and B to my right. I was still feeling a little uneasy, but I didn't give much thought to it. As we were all conversing about the plans for the rest of the day, I felt something on my back. It felt like someone had run their hand down my back. From the base of my neck to the centre of my back, I felt a firm, consistent pressure until the pressure tapered off, down to the base of my back. It was over within seconds. I felt all the colour drain from my face as I frantically jumped forward with a scream. B and C both looked at me in confusion and asked what happened, and if I'd hurt myself. In a haze of confusion and dizziness, I wasn't able to form any words, never mind describing what I just felt. I regained my bearings and took a couple of deep breaths before trying my best to explain the sensation of being touched. B's face turned a little pale as she saw how serious I was being. However, C was a skeptic. He laughed and thought I was joking, or that I'd accidentally hit something without realizing, or a bug had hit me. I knew that wasn't the case, because for a split second before it happened, I felt every single hair on my body stand up as a warning to what was about to happen. Being slightly freaked out, B and myself managed to convince C that it was time to leave. On top of what had just happened, it was also getting a little cold. While making our way to the same section we had entered through, I started to feel a burning sensation run down my back, like someone had taken hot coals or a flame down my back. Starting to freak out again, I asked B to check if anything was there, asking her what was wrong. I automatically knew something was wrong because she didn't give a response. She was just silent. Next thing I knew, B was calling over C to come and look, which made my anxiety spike up more. From the look on C's face, I became increasingly worried. They both nervously told me that there were marks going down my back. Obviously not being able to see my back myself, I then asked them to take a photo for me to see. Looking at the photo, there were 3 distinctive scratches going down my back, exactly where I'd felt someone or something touch me. At first, C was convinced I'd done it myself or called myself on something, but after examining the scratches more, he determined that it couldn't have been. The scratch went under my bra strap, which would have been impossible for me to do without them noticing. At this point, we're all trying to keep our calm while internally freaking out. We tried to make our way out as quick as we could without injuring ourselves. Climbing back over the wall of the house and through the hole where the roof used to be, we collectively walked a few feet away from the house and stopped to look at it. Still trying to understand what had just happened, we all agreed that we'd go back to the car and never come back there. The walk back to the car, which took around 20 minutes, was relatively uneventful. Apart from a continuous uneasy feeling that we were being watched or followed, and occasionally thinking that we could hear footsteps behind us, it was actually quite peaceful, taken in the Scottish countryside. We got to the car where we sat and had a smoke, still trying to completely calm ourselves down. It's safe to say that after that day, C took a long time to process the events, but undoubtedly became a believer. We swore to never come back to this house, but for some reason, we're always drawn back to it. It's like an urge to come back and visit, like an itch that you can't quite scratch. Maybe we're just drawn in by the eeriness or the mystery around that day, or maybe it's something more than that.